Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Katerji show with me, your host, Katerji. Sorry for the slightly delayed start this evening. We have had some technical difficulties getting Matthew online. We're trying to resolve those. And here he is now. Let's just see that that's working. And it is working. Matthew, can you hear me okay? There we go. Thank you so much for joining us, Matthew.
Finally.
Yeah,
finally.
there you go.
I do apologise. Technology is not my strong suit, but it might be something to do with the school summer holidays.
Listen, we've got you. You sound crystal clear. The visuals are fine as well, so we're absolutely good. Now, normally in this part of the show, again, sorry for the late start, guys. And if you're watching along on Twitch, hello. If you're watching afterwards on YouTube, hi. Thanks for joining us. Normally at this part of the show, I ask the guests to introduce themselves in a little small way, and then we go into the show asking a whole bunch of questions. The issue is with you is you've got such a fascinating like superhero backstory that we will be here all night basically talking about all of it. So there's no way I can really introduce you better than you can probably introduce yourself. So tell us your story from the beginning, and then we'll sort of ask some questions and pivot into it. But yeah, everyone, Matthew Collins from Hope Not Hate, tell us about yourself.
Hey. Okay, I'm Matthew Collins. I'm the head of intelligence at Hope Not Hate, which is an anti-racist and anti-fascist organization. You could buy my books, actually. They're quite good, which gives you a fairly good idea.
We'll put a link to all of those in the show notes. We will definitely do that. So you'll be able to buy his books, but if you're checking out in Twitch or YouTube after the show.
Brilliant. My story is probably best known as told on The Walk-In, which was on ITV and most recently Netflix. I was a young member of the extreme far right here in the United Kingdom, and I had a change of heart. I came to realize that sort of fascism and Nazism, which I was involved in, was wrong, and it was very, very dangerous. It was also quite contagious. And I spent a period of time then working as an anti-fascist inside, poacher turned gamekeeper. And then I ended up for Hope Not Hate being the person that recruits and looks after people who are active inside the far right, some of whom have changed sides, some of whom just do it for the money, and some of whom who are planted inside quite dangerous work. And the thing I was most famous for, or the thing that people most know about, as opposed to the things that they don't know about, is that in 2017 we uncovered a murder plot against a member of our parliament, and it led to, I think, 21 people in all being convicted for membership of a banned terror group. What made it all the more exciting was that or controversial was that our government here in the UK believed that this Nazi organization, National Action, had ceased to operate because of they'd issued them instructions to desist, and we knew that it hadn't, and we had someone inside the group who came to us and worked for us. And then that story is all, like I said, it's over 5 episodes on Netflix.
So we'll dive into all of that, because again, I really want to get up to that story. But I'd like you to take us right back to the beginning, to where you started out in life, your experiences, what led you down the path that you did, and then we'll get into those big explosive cases. I've also got a clip of the walk-in that we'll play to set that up later on.
Good. That means I'll get some kind of royalty bonus, I think. Maybe not. Okay, so I was born in Southeast London. I have Irish parents. I went to a very, very small church school. Then I went to a very, very large comprehensive school in Southeast London. And the thing that everybody always picks on is I'm also a product of the 1970s, is that my father left home with our babysitter, who was a woman of color. And people always think that as well as all the other issues around identity and belonging is obviously that my father left home with a woman of color, very young woman of color. When I was around about 12 or 13, I began to experience, I guess, a deep sense of isolation, a deep sense of mistrust, a jealousy, an anger about feeling left out or being left behind. And I drew the conclusion that although I was no more racist than anybody else, that I developed a really extreme and bitter hatred for people of other races. And if you get to a certain period in your life, of course, you get to see a celebrity shrink, not an NHS one. And they talk about how so much in my background, so much of my childhood would have led me to that path. And eventually, by the time I was 15, I was active in the National Front. When I was 17, 18, I was a full-time employee of the National Front, which the National Front is, I believe it's the longest running neo-Nazi political party in the world, in the entire world. Although to suggest it's still actually active and running is probably up for discussion. And that was basically me. And I obviously involved in an organization like that, which is driven by prejudices and hatreds and conspiracies. I was witness to, I took part in some pretty horrendous violent incidences, the most notorious of which would be described as the Battle of Welling Library, which involved the National Front and then the subsequently larger and more successful BNP, British National Party. And it was during a particularly violent and unnecessary engagement above a library. I had this epiphany. I just thought, oh, actually, fascism is very, very wrong, because I found myself with grown, grunting men attacking rather defenseless, incredibly defenseless women who were holding a meeting, funnily enough, to highlight how dangerous it was to have the far right active in their community. And then the far right, who always talk about their right to freedom of speech, turned up to the meeting. And then, as the far right always does when it can, inflicted horrific violence on the women in that meeting. And it was while that was happening, I somehow concluded I'm on the wrong side. These women here are the sort of people who actually cared about little old me on a council estate with no money, no job, no future. And so almost immediately I became what you would describe as an anti-fascist. However, there are two components, aren't there? There's anti-racism and there's anti-fascism. I wouldn't say I became an anti-racist overnight, because the issues by which I was a racist, I didn't have the skills or the I just didn't have the skills or the ability to address those things. But I certainly became anti-fascist, and I made the decision quite soon after that I would give information, particularly that would stop things like this happening again in the future, to anti-fascists. So it wasn't a case of running off to the old bill. It was more a question. I get slightly more prouder of it as I get older. I made a political and conscious decision that, in the words of Neil, fascists are bad, man. So that's what I did.
So I have had experience dealing with extremism, but it's mainly been within the Muslim community, Salafi jihadism. So my experience in talking to people about that de-radicalization process is about an ideology which is also far right, but it's different in ways and similar in other ways, but there is so much similarity in what you're talking about that process of which you kind of come to an epiphany and go, this is wrong, I'm on the wrong path. And but doing that is difficult enough. It's really again, the people that I know who have made that journey are people who have remarkably strong wills and who are very determined people. But you didn't just do that. You decided to become an informant for an anti-fascist organization. You can talk to us about your involvement with them. You reached out to them rather than them reaching out to you, and then that relationship grew and built over time, and then you became sort of one of the most significant anti-fascist campaigners, probably the most significant anti-fascist campaigner in the country, and that was a journey over many years. And so, well, maybe, but
yeah. Do you know that the word I was looking for earlier and I couldn't find, because I was also so flustered that I couldn't get the computer to work, was sophistication. But I didn't have the, I think this word will come up a couple more times in our conversation. I didn't have the sophistication to deal with challenging issues. So yes, well, the organization I began passing information to is the organization which is now known as Hope Not Hate. And any rather rambunctious race hater and conspiracy theorist in the world of social media would tell you how much they hate them and how terrible we are, which of course we see that completely as a medal of honor. The Germans called me the Fat James Bond, and coming from them, that's something. But what I did was I spent 3 years inside giving information to what is now Hope Not Hate, so that violent assaults and violent attacks could be avoided, so that if necessary, and there's no crime in this, so that if someone is violently assaulted, that the information is there. We also helped. There was a particular period in the late 1980s when Jewish cemeteries were being vandalized around the country, and this was being done ostensibly by the BNP. Was to sort of vandalize Jewish cemeteries and then lay the blame or lay clues so that people might think that the Muslim community was behind it. And there was a particular case which at the time it went over my head, which was we're going to Portsmouth and we're going to do something to really wind up the Jews. And I passed it on to my handler, as you want to say. He's a very famous filmmaker now, and he passed it on, but they sort of dropped the ball. And that weekend there was a massive desecration. One of the Jewish cemeteries in Portsmouth, like a lot of the graves had swastikas painted on them, and what that enabled sensible anti-fascists to do was to have those perhaps conversations out of the spotlight. Because a lot of the stuff that we do, obviously, we don't talk about, we don't brag about, we don't necessarily always shine a light on it, was to go to those people who mattered and say, listen, we know for a fact that the BNP did this. We know who it was. We know what time they left London and what time they got to Portsmouth and what time they got back to London. This is done so that two communities that are increasingly put under spotlight, under scrutiny, and under threat fall out with each other. And so that was significant. And then it obviously over a period of time, that particular period was the first time we ever really saw the start of far right, or the attempt to start far right terrorism. And I was there at the very beginning, in fact just before when it was decided it had to happen, when the organization C18 Combat 18 was formed, and I went along to the very, very early sort of nucleus meetings of it, and I became quite concerned. There was a number in that period of time, particularly in the north of Ireland and the 6 counties, there was lots of terrorism, and there were people in England and Scotland in particular who wanted to involve themselves and sort of ratchet up that kind, the violence and the murder and the terrorism and the killings in Northern Ireland at the time. And that was all around that period of time when I began giving information to what is now Hope Not Hate. And I found myself going from sort of corner of the street packy bashers, sort of that run over the mill everyday racism people has to put up with, to suddenly people who were quite prepared to contribute to murder, terrorism, and mayhem in an entirely different country. So in 1993, and that's how old I am, in 1993, I flew to Australia. The World in Action documentary series did an expose of Combat 18, and my reward was an air ticket to Australia, and that was it. I was unheard. I spent 10 years living in Australia, and I came back in 2003 when the BNP were starting to really win council seats. They were aiming to get onto the Greater London Assembly, as they later did. And the idea was that using the information that I had, the experiences that I'd had inside that organisation, the National Front, C18, and other things, I would help form some kind of block to go and talk and do meetings. And I spent I don't know, I spent something like 10 years doing two or three meetings a week, which was good because I think it helped give experience to people. Also showed that leopards do change their spots, obviously, but one of the sort of downsides was that for a large part of it, not all of it, but for a large part of it, of course, you have to keep talking to the converted, and then we moved on after the collapse of the BNP, say 2011, 2012 onwards. I moved into a role because the far right had abandoned electoral politics, and they'd moved into what they would call a state of agitation, which was the drift onwards towards terrorism. And my role became then finding those people who were disillusioned, turning them, but also having them as eyes. It was very a job I'd done myself previously, having them as eyes and ears in the movement, and I've done that ever since.
Now, some of this would have been a great risk to your life. We're talking about very dangerous people, very dangerous organizations, and obviously that put a lot of pressure on you. It's put a lot of pressure on your family. That's a rather extraordinary thing to do. Not just to do it once, but to keep going back and to keep going back, and to be that person that's putting yourself on the line to talk, not just throughout your early days, but you have continued to face risks to your life by still reaching out to prospective converts, as you called them.
Yep.
This is a very risky job that you're doing. So talk us through that. That must be very psychologically very difficult for you to deal with, right?
Yes, it has its peaks and troughs, its highs and its lows. The show is named after the term the walk-in. The walk-in is someone that comes to you. There's a number of people for a number of reasons. Some of them come seeking forgiveness, which is fine. Some of them come seeking revenge, hopefully on their former colleagues and not us. And some people come just because they need money. So you have to manage your own expectations and also their own. You wouldn't believe how many people, for instance, come and tell us something we already know, and they think they're going to get paid £10,000 for it. So you're talking very, very small amounts you're talking beer and book tokens mainly. The others are the ones that we contact. So we study everything. And that becomes an increasingly more, in the growth of the digital age and its increasing complexities becomes more and more difficult. But we know when to make an approach. And in fact, up until 2 years ago, and it's not something you do every day because everything has risk and cost. But up until 2 years ago, I'd approached 27 people and I'd only had 3 of them turn me down. And the 3 of them who turned me down never, ever told anybody about the approach that had been made. That's because obviously once the approach has been made, I guess you're forever under suspicion by them. And that involved in that, I guess, is a little bit of what you'd probably call pop psychology, a little bit of inside knowledge. And we're just looking for the person who is increasingly becoming disengaged, feeling disillusioned with it, or they're upset, or they've had a falling out, and we make no bones about it. Where there is an open wound, we will rub salt. We have no empathy or no sympathy for people who are engaged in ongoing continuous racial hatred and racial violence and persecution of people. So yeah, we take advantage of these situations, and sometimes we may even create them themselves. One of the things that we wear as a badge of honor is the absolute paranoia that exists in the organized far right in the United Kingdom, that they know, but they don't know who. In every meeting, on every march, in every chat group, in every chat room, someone there is potentially working for us. And I remember this national action. It was the most extraordinary, secretive and sophisticated organization. They were very, very young men. So they were very, in terms of technically, they were very, very sophisticated. They bragged that Hope Not Hate could never, ever, ever get into their group. We were at the time, I was at the time, almost 24 hours a day reading their innermost thoughts and quite sickening desires, much of which were focused on my family and I. And that, and when they found out that we'd been inside and right inside the guts of them, this group that wanted to change the entire world and turn it inside out, they couldn't believe it. They underestimated us and underestimate us at your will, because we're zealots. Simple as that.
So I will say that I, at the time when I was doing some of my early work into researching extremism and covering ISIS, I was following some of these guys through social media, and a lot of the
because they were also. I mean, look, their inspiration came from ISIS.
Yeah, and these guys were being very open with Twitter. That, I mean, I don't want to name their names to give them any sort of hero cult status, but I was familiar with some of these guys, and they were starting to have a criminal history, in the mid 2010s. Look, I also wanted to bring a point and say that Jo Cox was someone that I knew. I didn't know her extremely well, but this was probably the closest relationship that I had with an MP up at that point in my career. She was someone who was very involved with what was happening in Syria. She was basically the only MP that was really using her platform to talk about Syria, and her death was a devastating blow for the Syrian activist community, and they'd lost their only advocate, and it felt for many of them that she'd been targeted specifically because of the work that she'd been doing with Syrian refugees.
Very interesting you say that, because another advocate for Syria, in fact, the Syrian regime, was, of course, Nick Griffin, the former leader of the DNP, who was very, very close to Assad. And when obviously Jo Cox was murdered, and some of the GoFundMe money that was raised went to the White Helmets, Nick Griffin and others who were big fans of Assad and genocide were apoplectic in the things that they said about the White Helmets, apoplectic in the things that they said about Jo Cox. So how interesting, and how all these things do obviously in the end intertwine somehow.
So yeah, it's again that was a really devastating loss for the country. But you guys stepped up to the plate and prevented something like this from happening again. And so look, without further ado, I wanted to introduce the walk-in, the show. You're played by Stephen Graham in it. I'll play the clip now, and please do check it out. It's so gripping. It's so fascinating to actually watch a dramatization of it. So let me just hope that I can do this technically and make it work.
I'm just going.
He was one of the leading lights in the far right in this country.
I've written a piece about national action being the biggest threat from the far right.
That's me in that photograph 20 years ago.
We need to be stronger, ready for the war that's coming.
We've got to get someone inside this group. I did some bad things.
You're not that person anymore. I don't think it's good for you on your own. You need to mix with people more.
Welcome to the Islamic Republic of Bradford.
If they are planning something, we won't know about it until it's too late.
We need that walking. Why do you want to join National Action?
I get frustrated. First sign of any trouble, you call me.
We need his name.
He's trying to help us.
You're out of your depth.
Are we going to have to move again?
There's got kids on there. Find them.
What's going on, Robbie?
Nothing is going on. This is the murder of an MP. Exactly what National Action have been waiting for.
The Walk-In, Monday 3rd of October on ITV and ITV Hub.
So really, really gripping stuff there. So I really do recommend you check it out for the full story. But listen, you were there. That's you. Give us the blow by blow with basically when you started to suspect that there was going to be, that these guys weren't just online cosplayers, that they were serious and that they were considering, their own kind of attacks, basically.
Well, we were, like I said, we had access to the innermost, darkest thoughts and fantasies. There not from us, obviously, but I think there was something in society that says it tends to be all right if they're white and they say things like that, because white boys are all jibber jabber and they're not like they're Muslims or anything. But initially, when they first started, we thought, yes, they pose a threat to mainly anti-fascists or socialists or trade unionists, and we watched it sort of ferment to the point where, infamously, I said, if it talks like a terrorist, it walks like a terrorist, which they were doing, then it is terrorist. And by the time it was banned in 2016, it's quite interesting. I mean, there were quite serious flaws in the way the government knew and understood how the extreme far right operated in this country, because the Home Secretary Amber Rudd said basically, yes, they're anti-Semitic and they're homophobic, which of course the entire far right in Britain is anti-Semitic and homophobic. And they glorified the murder of Joe Cox, and they encouraged others to murder Joe Cox. To replicate the murder of Joe Cox. But I still don't think they necessarily took it seriously. In her speech, Amber Rudd didn't seem particularly, on top of exactly what made National Action different from groups like the EDL or groups like the BNP. And I just knew that although there would be this attitude, well, they're just a bunch of white boys. And how prescription happens is, you'll be interested to know, it's basically you receive a letter in the post and it says, "Dear Mr. Smith, from next Friday, we've deemed your organization a terrorist organization. Please throw all your flags and leaflets in the bin and don't do it again." And that's basically what happened to National Action. And we later then had the opportunity to see, in the lead up to, in the immediate aftermath of the ban, how copying one or two particular Islamist organizations in this country, they just said, all right, we'll just change leaders and change our name and we'll carry on. And it's basically what they did. But we had someone, thankfully, in there who, slowly but surely we saw the nature of the language change. They shed one skin for another, which is, again, is a direct quote. And then they started talking about, now that they felt that they crossed the threshold. So by still meeting, they opened a bloody gym and they opened an office under the less than watchful eye of the government. So they were already terrorists anyway by doing these things, by carrying on their associations, and they began to formulate an idea, a plan. So when will we actually commit acts of terrorism? When will we do that? And they felt they needed sparks to do it. And unfortunately, in the year 2000 and 2017, there were a number of incidences of, Islamic terrorism. The worst, but not the only, I guess, was the Manchester Arena attack. In fact, on the night of that, I was in Manchester with Robbie Mullen, who was our person inside National Action. And I knew then that this sickness was very, very real when on the weekend after that, when, you know, people like Tommy Robinson and others were demonstrating in Manchester, deport all Muslims and all this kind of rubbish, that National Action met as a unit and went down to watch people grieving. And, you know, that made them excited because that was the sort of thing they were going to replicate. And they had an idea that they could one strike. So they said there would be 3 Islamic attacks in London, and then they would strike back with one. And fortunately for them, Darren Osborne, a rather disturbed bloke from Wales, drove his van from Cardiff to North London and then tried to attack an Islamic centre in North London. But we were seeing all these communications between them, and they were geared up to it and they were ready to do it. And then I took a very, very rare holiday. It's very difficult to get a holiday when you've got a partner and you've got young children and you've got a job that at the time was 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I took a 1-week holiday, and it was during that 1 week I was away where a young man, Jack Renshaw, went to the National Action leadership and and said that he was going to kill his local MP, and he was also going to kill a policewoman, a particular policewoman who'd been investigating him for grooming. Now, his colleagues misunderstood what the grooming was. He was in fact being investigated for grooming young children. He was a pederast. He was a paedophile who had been trying to abuse young boys. And so I, on this rare family holiday, eventually took a phone call, and then there began this most incredible story, which the walk-in takes up, where we, as journalists, we went to the police and said, "This is the person who's going to kill. This is the MP they're going to kill. This is the plan. This is all this stuff." And the police said, "Brilliant." Long story short of it, by the way, you've broken the law, because under one of the under some legislation in the year 2000, it then became illegal, and don't get me started on that, to talk to people who were engaged in illegal organisations. And so the walk-in deals with quite a large part of that. But my colleague Nick Lowles and I, the deal we make with people that give us information is we will go to prison to protect your identity. I mean, that for us is non-negotiable. Otherwise, no one will ever trust you. And so we had this very, very long and exhausting game of cat and mouse with rather humiliated anti-terrorism officers who had, days before we uncovered this plot, had told the government, "Yeah, don't worry about National Action. The far-right terror threat is over." And yeah, so we faced going to prison. We wouldn't hand over the witness. The police had all the evidence, but they made it very, very clear that we would go to prison. So we made it clear to them, yes, we'll go to prison, but you've got your man, and you've got all this evidence, so you can close down this terror group you said didn't exist. And we've saved the lives of an MP and a police officer. And then, that all plays out, but which is also covered, I think, to a degree in the walk-in, is the terrible trauma of it, going to court, living in hiding. We had threats to our children. We had to move our children from school. Very, very real threats. And I want to be clear on this, 20 plus people since then have been arrested for preparation of terrorism. Almost every one of those arrests for hoarding documents or preparation of terrorism also includes an element of child sexual exploitation. Many times newspapers don't print it, but we were very, very aware. We're talking about people, Jack Renshaw, the one who was going to kill the MP in particular, had an obsession with having sex with children, and they believed that it was how you could desensitize yourself, was to engage in child sexual exploitation, and they made it pretty clear that my children would be a pretty good practice, if you will, and also my mother. So we had to deal with all of that, and also the terrible restrictions placed on Robbie Mullen. So he wasn't able to work. So we had to pay for his rent. We had to give him pocket money and spending money while we're hiding him. And Hope Not Hate's a terribly small organization in reality. And we didn't want to be in dispute or sort of at war with the counter-terrorism officers. But anyway, as you can watch, all's well that ends well in the end. And Robbie and I both live happily ever after now. Not together, obviously.
Look, that's a horrific thing that for anyone to have to go through. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know that was a difficult experience for you all, but you pursued it with great bravery. And look, I think the question I have now really is you've kind of given us the blow by blow, but what I don't understand, and again, this is something I've done myself. So and also the point that you made about journalists having to be willing to go to prison to protect their sources. Yes. This is a fundamental part of the job that I think a lot of outsiders probably don't understand. Why you would be prepared to go to prison for someone who isn't. And
let's be clear, Tommy Robinson doesn't go to prison for journalism.
Yeah. Sure.
Let's just be a little bit clear about that.
Yeah. But yeah, look, again, but I myself have had communication with people who are members of, very, very violent extremist organizations in the Middle East as part of my job. Honestly, I've sat with some people who are terrifying murderers. And that's something that I've had to learn how to adapt to. It's the job. Obviously it's a very different because I'm far away from home in these places that I'm meeting up with people. This is very close to home for you, so again, huge thanks for sharing that. But I wanted to ask you about the process that you go through in talking to someone who is like yourself, when you were younger, who is teetering on the edge, who is, questioning fascism, but not quite questioning their prejudices towards minorities.
I'm not going to give away Mr. Kipling's recipes. Look, there's a number of people that will contact us to give us the runaround, or has happened quite recently, try and arrange a meeting and attack one of us. Contacting us, we're prepared to talk to anyone for any period of time. Meeting someone, we have to know who you are. That always makes it very, very difficult for them. We want to know who you are, and then we can trace you, and we can find out about you. Our actual aim is to do as much damage to fascists and Nazis and wannabe terrorists as possible. But actually, the aim that I have, the personal aim, my personal mission, is that it comes back to the sophistication. I think there are so many people with so many questions. You see them standing outside hotels, and there's people that think we can just shout at them and shout them down, which almost entirely plays into their prejudices. But there are people who have so many questions about where do they fit in society? Why can't they have things for nothing? What really is my birth rate? Why can't I have? Why don't I have? And a lot of these people we work with have this horrendous sense of loss, a sense of loss about things they've never actually had. And it comes down to, and I think social media is incredibly to blame for a lot of this. The growth of conspiracy theory is that people are, I think, more than ever before searching for answers. And whether we like it or not, and this is what I tell those meetings where I go and speak to the converted, the question isn't why do people join far-right groups? The question is, why shouldn't they? Have we built a society? Have we succeeded in a society where they're not needed? And the problem is, and sometimes you want to shake people, they say, oh, well, we can just give everyone a house if we knock down Buckingham Palace. Oh, well, we can give everyone a house if we build more housing. But the question is, again, but now, tomorrow, when tomorrow 200 or 300 people will arrive on a beach in Kent. I'm sophisticated enough, allegedly, but I understand that that's a process. I understand that there are obligations. But for other people who view it, who have nothing, it's pointless shouting at them and telling them about these ideas we have about living in La La Land. So we have to understand that the far right is increasingly attractive to people who are increasingly damaged, who are increasingly divorced from civil society. Have we built society civil enough to withstand these pressures? Have we built society civil enough? Well, I think in some ways we have, because we put up with a lot. You know, look at the state of our water. Look at the expense of heating our homes. Look at our poor pensions. So, in many terms, our society is quite civil to withstand a lot of things. But I also think some of that patience is eroding. And then coming back to sophistication, as it has always been, it's always been easier to point the finger at the poorest in society. So I have the question: why shouldn't someone join the far right? Is our society strong enough to withstand the pressures? And I think increasingly it's not. But do I want to meet? Yes, I want to meet them all. We have this process called socialization. People, you wouldn't believe in in 21st century Britain, the 5th or 6th, will be 7th next week, richest economy in the world, probably 8th by Christmas. How few people you still meet who've never actually eaten out at a restaurant. And I'm not talking about the Scottish restaurant with the drive-through. I mean a proper restaurant, even a curry house or a Chinese restaurant. How few people have even left the country, have ever experienced anything else? And how many people are still living in real poverty? And when you see that, I think in the borough I'm from in London, it's 1 in 4 children live in poverty. That's just horrendous. So don't be surprised that people aren't sophisticated enough, or people aren't civil enough to withstand the pressures. And then there is that age-old thing, isn't there? But the richest in society, of course, are also pointing at the poorest in society and telling people like you and me, who might be on picket lines or whatever, or worrying about mortgages, jobs, homes, heating, pensions. Yeah, but what about the boat people? So yeah, I want to have those conversations, but people need to understand where they're coming from. And if I was an old hippie, I'd say I'd love to give the world a big hug, man. But I'm not, and don't like hippies. But I want we're getting to a point where there's such a division in society. People are just shouting at each other. We're not listening to each other. And I think that's one of the things I want to do, particularly people that are involved in far right groups. We do it all the time. This idea about socializing them. So where do you want to go? What do you want to see? And there's this thing that Prevent do. No wonder the Muslim community call it Provoke, where someone's spouting off a lot of Islamophobic rubbish. And this sort of very middle-class chap at Prevent says, "Oh, I'm going to take you to a mosque." And I'll say, "Well, yeah, you could do that. You could probably take them to a church." The increasing numbers of people that are clinging to religion or religious ideals. The amount of abuse I get from racist lunatics on social media, the amount of them who have a Christian cross in their bio and describe themselves as Christian is extraordinary. And at a time when the churches are empty, what are they doing? So no, I see having those conversations and those debates as part of that big process. The big process that anti-fascists have to be part of is, first of all, the electoral process. So not shouting slogans, but actually we have to engage in that electoral process, and that is talking to people on the doorsteps, offering them believable and salient solutions, because we have big problems ahead of us. The main one is reform, this juggernaut reform, which is a bunch of sort of like Cockney white boys who don't pay tax, pointing fingers at poor people getting off boats. So
look,
I hope I surmised it all before you
have
karaoke starts, because karaoke starts soon.
Well, look, I wanted to ask you about you touched upon those anti-migrant protests that started breaking out in the UK outside of these hotels that have been housing people who have come on small boats. Obviously this culminated very recently in a series of riots. There was, attempted arson. These kinds of things have had serious, and as you said, not everyone involved in these protests is what you would traditionally, class as a right-wing extremist. and these fault lines that exist in Britain are very real. We have to have some way of the state addressing them. A part of the issue is the far right are currently on the ground now, exploiting these fault lines and trying to agitate, as they would call it, against the government. And they have in Reform a sort of respectable face of quite, strong hardline anti-immigrant politics that 10, 15 years ago would have not had any kind of real electoral threat. So, how do we navigate these waters?
Well, I think problematically, if you look at the pendulum, the political pendulum, I think people prefer it to sort of be in the middle of the road and just let everybody else skirt and skip around it. And it has, go back as far as, I guess, 9/11, it has slowly more crept to the right, more and more identity politics. And then we've got this culture wars. And then we have Reform, who are actually a far-right political party. Some people are calling them a Nazi party, a fascist party. I don't think they are those yet. And Reform have been a part of a process to just bring the vulgarity of racism back into the mainstream, the vulgarity that we hadn't seen since Tory MPs put out leaflets about something that rhymed with Labour for a neighbour. Reform have brought the ugliness, the greed, and the shallowness back into the mainstream, which we hadn't seen since the likes of Norman Tebbit told people to get on their bikes, or the Tories demanded to know which football team or cricket team people supported when England played against them. They've made everything so disgusting that we are in a situation now, and I come back to that word sophistication, where people don't even think before they speak. We're at a situation now where people are pointing their fingers at doctors and nurses, where only 5 or 6 years ago, of course, we were out banging sauce ones about them. They are the worst in society, and they are going. They could become our government if we don't get our act together. And the people that are standing outside those hotels are organized by social media because someone makes a claim against someone, which must be investigated. But let the police investigate these claims. I think the last thing people want outside hotels are these great big boorish men with flags shouting about getting immigrants out. These riots fell almost a year to the week after the riots we had last year, after those terrible murders in Southport. It's recently been revealed that 40% of people who were arrested for Southport riots also had a prior report of domestic violence against them. One of the women, these concerned mothers, who was marching to one of the hotels, talking about that, we don't know who these unvetted men are. They could be a danger to women and children. I understand people could be concerned about that. Failed to mention that her own son had been thrown out of a political party for allegedly exposing himself to people who didn't want to see him. So it's in every strand of society. What it is about is that the majority of people in this country don't like the idea that people are sleeping in hotels for free. And they think somehow that coming to this country on a boat over the English Channel has been particularly easy for them, and that somehow there's people in France and I'm going to go and live in England. I'm going to get a free mobile phone and I'm going to get a free television and I'm going to stay in a 5-star hotel. Let me tell you, any hotel you can get for £49 a night in London is not 5-star or decent. These people who are standing outside hotels are like these mad vigilante mobs. All right. And they're almost exactly the same as the people that are inside the hotels, poor, confused, distressed. Okay. And some of them will also probably be liable to engage in violence against girls and women. So they are not spokespeople for us. And again, it comes back to where is the civilized in our society who will speak to common sense and for common sense. But yeah, these protests are growing. It's underpinned by the racism. And the racism, of course, is what drives the fear, because the rumors that they say about what's happening. Let's be very, very clear. Few of these cases have been proven. Few of these cases have even gone to court yet. And here you've got the great and the good who've got nothing better to do all day than stand outside hotels drinking beer, accusing the people inside of the hotels who are seeking asylum, accusing them of being what, slobs, thieves, slouches. But this is the state of the country at the moment, and this is what UKIP will have us all doing, drinking beer on street corners in lieu of doing something useful for our communities.
So look, I did want to ask a follow up to one of the points that you made. You said let the police investigate some of these things, but you yourself have in this interview have criticised how the police have handled things. You know, so again, it's not the far right's fault that there's a failure of trust in institutions.
Oh no, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
So how do we do that as a civil society? How do we,
because in our instance, we wanted the police to investigate it. We didn't at any stage think we were an alternative to the police. We didn't go out and do vigilante work. Our work is based on our professionalism, and it's also our job to do it. It gets stretched to a point. And throughout the process, when it was necessary, we didn't hinder the police. We didn't throw bricks at the police. We gave them all the information we thought would help them with a prosecution. We did it. No, we are the experts on that.
Even as they were threatening you with potential prosecution, you were still going to them.
Yeah, and I understand that they were a bit humiliated. I don't think they've been humiliated again since. That is the difference. Standing outside a hotel, shouting racist abuse, drinking cans of lager does not stop young women being assaulted, does it? And if you want, and we want the police to investigate these things, of course, we can point to the number of times when prosecutions of rapists or child sexual abusers have been threatened by the activities of far-right extremists. One far-right extremist who turns up outside a court case claiming he's just exposed a grooming case, a grooming gang, when they're already up before court. And again, it's down to sensibility, civility, sophistication. If you are concerned about young men living in hotels, and if you are worried or concerned that they may be likely to engage in inappropriate behavior, that's fine. Those are legitimate concerns. Every time I see a young man, I think he's probably up to no good, right? That's the society we live in. 40% of those arrested after the Southport riots had themselves a report of some kind of domestic abuse against them. So so these are the sort of people that could be standing outside hotels pointing fingers at other people. So the big worry is the lack of sense and sensibility in this country.
Well, look at that. We've dealt with some really, really difficult topics tonight. I've got one final question for you. If there are any people in the chat who want to ask one, maybe be kind enough to answer. They don't always. Sometimes they just sit there silently and don't ask. But the one question I want,
sometimes they just abuse afterwards.
On a positive note, you had Stephen Graham play you in a TV series, which we've already discussed. But what was that like? What was that like having Stephen Graham portray you in a TV? Like, that must be a totally mind-blowing experience, not just for you, but I suppose your children and your family, right?
Well, my children haven't watched it. My children think I'm a lollipop man. No, it was extraordinary. I didn't realize how big and popular he was until I was in America and everyone knew who he was. Look, he's an extraordinary person. I also have to say his wife is as well, because his wife is like the gatekeeper. So she did the interviews, and it was good. And of course, I've got the Scouse accent in the show because he was filming two things at the same time, because it was just during and just after lockdown. So I guess like anybody else, he had to finish what work he'd started. And so he couldn't do Matilda and do the walk-in and have two different accents. I mean, it would have driven him wild. So the only concession I had was that his children in the show had to be Crystal Palace supporters. But no, very, very, really, really pleased that I was played by Stephen Graham. And overall, I was really, really pleased with how the show portrayed what happened. It was about 90% accurate.
Wow. So listen, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry for my technical difficulties.
Oh no, it's all good.
Part old age, part school holidays with things that get plugged with it.
Well, this is your first live stream, right? You're entering the world of Twitch now. So welcome.
I think it's about my 700th, but it's the first time on Twitch.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us, giving us an hour of your time. We really appreciate it. And look, I really want to say we're all very, very supportive of your work. I'll put links down below. But do keep fighting that good fight. You are really on the front lines of this stuff, and as you said, there is so much more to do. It's the work is never done.
Everybody has a part to play, and most importantly, it's to vote. Hold your nose and vote. That's the only way we can keep these people out.
Yes, I would encourage you to vote, and to vote for Labour. I will go further.
Well, whoever can beat the nasty candidate. That's why I say hold your nose and vote.
Hold your nose and vote. All right. Well, listen. Thank you so much, Matthew. Take care, and all the best.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Oh, I think I cut him off accidentally halfway through his sentence. But that was Matthew Collins. Thank you so much if you've followed along all this way so far. It was a real privilege to have him on as a guest. It's someone I've wanted to long have a discussion with about all of the fascinating elements of his life. I'm also interested in doing a similar discussion with someone who was in a jihadist organization to talk about that. So I'm going to try and organize that within the coming weeks if possible. Thanks to everyone who's following along on Twitch live. J.O. Dizzle, thanks man. Always good to hear from you, and Queen Sabine. It's it's the discussions like these are always really fascinating to me, because it's perspectives that this isn't my world. I've touched upon it in parts of my career, but hearing these kinds of stories direct from the sources are really fascinating things. A real privilege to have him on the show. So look, if you followed along live, thank you so much. If you're following along now on YouTube afterwards, please do like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. If you've got any suggestions for guests, if you've got any ideas, thoughts you have about any of these shows, please do pop them in the comments. Please do send me the comments. We're really trying to keep growing, and audience feedback's really important for all of that. And listen, if you want to send me questions to ask to guests in the future, Twitch is the only place you can do that. So sign up to Twitch and follow us along there. Trying to migrate my large Twitter audience into Twitch has not been a very smooth process. A lot of people don't want to do that extra click, so I have started streaming on Twitter as well to reach them, and we have thousands of viewers who come directly from Twitter. So again, thank you to all of you guys who are watching on Twitter, but I am trying to encourage people to come over to Twitch. So if you want to send direct messages, you'll have to do that on Twitch in the future. But anyway, this is the end of the week's shows. Thank you so much if you've watched any of them this week, and so thank you so much if you've watched all three of them. We're going to be bringing you 3 new shows next week, as always, streaming to you live from Kyiv, no matter the difficult circumstances. If there's explosions rocking the place, air defense in the sky, I've got a leaky roof, whatever the conditions are, we're gonna keep bringing you these shows for as long as we can. But we really rely on your support to do all of that. So if you've enjoyed any of this, if you found any of these discussions useful, please do consider at least liking and subscribing. And if you want to go that extra way, there's links down below to help out, and always there's my coffee link there. That always helps to buy me a coffee or two. We'd really like to bring on a producer at some point to help make these shows that little bit without the technicals happening here and there. So look, thank you so much for everyone who's followed along tonight. Really appreciate you as always. I've been Oz Katerji. This has been the Oz Katerji Show. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. Be kind to each other. And I will see you on the next one on Tuesday. So have a great time. Love you all. Bye.